Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The World's Last Night. This is James Thayer. I'm actually recording in my office today, so if it sounds different, that is why. But I've had a really long 2 weeks. We did 8 different shoots in 14 days. And between yesterday and the day before that, we worked about, 28 hours, about 14-hour days each day. So it's been long. I've actually come down with some sort of sinus dealio, so if I sound funny, that's why. But today we are in Exodus chapter 10, and we get to sort of see 2 more plagues before we come to the final plague. Now, these 2 plagues are very interesting to me. The 9th plague especially, because it's going to let us be able to talk a little bit about God's character, the nature of light, maybe talk a little bit about science and how humans actually experience our natural surroundings. So that sounds a little weird right now, but we'll get into that in a little bit. Let's go ahead and start reading verse 1 in chapter 10. Okay. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his officials, so that I may do these miraculous signs of mine among them, and so that you may tell them, your son and your grandson, how severely I dealt with the Egyptians and performed miracles, miraculous signs among them. And you will know that I am Yahweh." So he's being told to go back to talk to Pharaoh again. And Pharaoh's heart is hardened. But he tells us that, one of the reasons that I'm doing this is so you can tell your children and your children's children, which that's like a huge theme in the rest of the Old Testament, is people trying to hearken back and remember when God brought them out of Egypt. A lot of the prophets will tell the Israelites, remember and repent. Because what ends up happening, as you find, is the Israelites become the same thing as the Egyptians. Frequently, they will delve into paganism. And now, they don't usually worship the Egyptian gods, but the Philistine gods. And these plagues are actually going to be used to strike fear into the Philistines, who hear that the Israelites are coming, and they hear about what the Israelites' God did in Egypt before they even get there. And it's just unfortunate that Israel could never parse out all the false religions among them from Yahweh, which, he's trying to make his name here as the one who is a promise keeper. Promised to bring him out of slavery, and here he's doing it. Verse 3, so Moses and Aaron went into Pharaoh and told him. And also, that's sort of interesting, went into Pharaoh. I mean, what it really means is they went into his presence. And that to me, that's just it's sort of interesting word usage, because I think about what it's like to be in God's presence or to be dismissed from God's presence. Someone, basically, if you're in the court of someone who is a ruler, there's just some sort of gravitas with that. It's like their presence in some sort of sense is actually them, or how it impacts you, or the reign it has over you, the power it has over you. So I find it very interesting how it's worded, but it's not really a big deal to what we're talking about today. So, all right, Pharaoh and told him, "This is what Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews, says. How long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, that they may worship me." So God's calling him out on his pride issue, which is sort of the root of a hard heart. Hard heart is in contrast to a contrite heart. A contrite heart is a humble heart. Usually comes along with basically tears or a desire for forgiveness and a desire to make amends. Well, a hard heart, that usually comes with anger, a desire to win or to rule over oneself, as opposed to letting God rule over you. So he's calling him out on his pride. "But if you refuse to let my people go, then tomorrow I will bring locusts into your territory. They will cover the surface of the land, so that no one will be able to see the land. They will eat the remainder left to you that escaped the hail. They will eat every tree you have growing in the fields. They will fill your houses, all your officials' houses, and the houses of all the Egyptians, something your fathers and ancestors never saw since the time they occupied the land until day." Then he turned and left Pharaoh's presence. All right, verse 7. Pharaoh's officials asked him, "How long must this man be a snare to us? Let the men go, so that they may worship Yahweh their God. Don't you realize yet that Egypt is devastated?" So Pharaoh's officials are basically, I don't know, a little smarter, a little more humble than Pharaoh, saying, just let him go already. Like, we are completely devastated. Verse 8. So Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh. "Go, worship Yahweh your God," Pharaoh said. "But exactly who will be going?" Moses replied, "We will go with our young and our old. We will go with our sons and daughters, and with our flocks and herds, because we must hold Yahweh's festival." He said to them, "May Yahweh be with you if I ever let you and your families go. Look out, you are planning evil. No, only the men may go and worship Yahweh, for that is what you have been asking for." And they were driven from Pharaoh's presence. Okay, so you're going to see this theme reoccurring with Pharaoh. He's shrewd. He's trying to negotiate with God. Now, negotiation only works when the two parties have equal power. This is one reason, like people always say in American politics, you want to negotiate from strength. Because you can't negotiate if you don't have any leverage over the other person. Now, leverage comes in multiple forms. It could be you have military leverage over them, or it could be you have something that they desire, they want really, really bad. And so then you have some leverage over their desires or inclinations. Well, guess what? Pharaoh doesn't have any leverage. I mean, he thinks he does because he is keeping these people in slavery, right? But when you're negotiating with God in the universe, who can snap his finger and take your life at any moment he chooses, then you really don't have much of a position to negotiate from. And yet Pharaoh tries this anyways, which is, it's unwise. He's, I think, beyond reasoning now. He's given into foolishness. So he's basically saying, hey, yeah, you can go, but only the men, not all of Israel. All right, verse 12. The Lord then said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the land of Egypt, and the locust will come up over it and eat every plant in the land, everything that the hail left." So Moses stretched out his staff over the land of Egypt, and the Lord sent an east wind over the land all that day and through the night. By morning the east wind had brought in the locusts. The locusts went up over the entire land of Egypt and settled on the whole territory of Egypt. Never before had there been such a large number of locusts, and there never will be again. They covered the surface of the whole land so that the land was black. And they consumed all the plants on the ground and all the fruit of the trees that the hail had left. Nothing green was left on the trees or the plants in the field throughout the land of Egypt. So that's absolute devastation. There's nothing to eat. Now, look how far these people have fallen from the days of Joseph, when that Pharaoh listened to God, right? Listened to wisdom that God gave Joseph for storing up, for prosperity, to make it through famine. This Pharaoh's doing the opposite of that, and he's reaping what he sows. In opposition to God, he removes his hand of prosperity from you, and you're left with this, a hard heart and desolate land. Now, the idea is that hopefully this desolation, the pain that Pharaoh's going through, is going to make him want to repent, but pride will keep us from doing that. Good gracious. Okay. So Pharaoh urgently sent for Moses and Aaron and said, "I have sinned against Yahweh, your God, and against you. Please forgive my sin once more and make an appeal to Yahweh your God, so that he will take this death away from me." Moses left Pharaoh's presence and appealed to the Lord. Then the Lord changed the wind to a strong west wind, and it carried off the locusts and blew them into the Red Sea. Not a single locust was left in all the territory of Egypt. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the Israelites go. You guys probably have seen locusts before, right? They come, there's one that comes like every 7 years. And they just sort of, I guess, sleep underground or incubate. And then boom, suddenly there's millions of them. This would have been a sight to see. I would have loved to have seen, what does it look like, the entire ground covered in locusts? I mean, I don't want to experience it, but maybe some ILM CGI for a movie might be kind of cool to see what that's like. Okay, so what is this plague doing, or what could it possibly be doing to insult Egyptian gods? So the Egyptian god Set was supposed to be the protector of crops. And so, well, this decimated any perceived power the Egyptian demon god Set may have had, right? Because we know God is the God of the harvest. Our God is the God of the harvest. So he can make it grow, and he can also send insects to desolate it. And Egypt is learning that the hard way. Verse 21, then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand towards heaven, and there will be darkness over the land of Egypt, a darkness that can be felt. So that's what I wanted to talk about. What does that mean when there's a darkness that can be felt? There's some sort of supernatural element to this darkness, in my opinion. Have you ever been in the middle of the desert? I had this experience in El Paso on a ranch, multiple 1,000-acre ranch, right? Standing there by myself because the rest of the crew had gone. We were filming and just closing my eyes and hearing like pitch silence, whatever that's called. Can't hear a single sound. There's a room that's in existence actually where it is so soundproofed you can hear your own blood flow. Well, think about that, but with the element of sight. It's so dark you can feel the darkness. And in my opinion, this has some supernatural element to it, because we know that God is light, and in God there is found no darkness, right? And one of the first things he created was light. And even in the New Testament, in Revelation, there's no sun. Instead, for the new earth, God emanates the light. He is the light. So you kind of imagine that perhaps God removed a piece of his character from Egypt for this plague. So much so that without God's presence there in the form of his light, you could feel the void. It's a void with weight to it. There's this thing called dark matter in space. And, at one point we thought that the universe was just really empty. But now we think there's something called dark matter. So this is a matter that is dark. You can't see it, and yet it's matter. So it has some sort of mass, some sort of weight to it. So we're not really sure what that is right now. Have you ever seen a solar eclipse? So a solar eclipse, it should be daylight, but it's not. It's like midday, and the moon's covering up the sun. It feels weird. It messes with your senses. And you start seeing those little snake patterns on the ground. It's celestially strange to the human experience that it makes you feel something just by taking in the sights. I think that there is more to the human experience than most people will talk about. Like, we like to compartmentalize things. Even as Christians, we like to compartmentalize, my spirit is feeling this way. My emotions are feeling this way. My body is feeling this way. Yet, I think a more scriptural approach to that is really that, all things affect every aspect of the human being. So, what you eat, you might think you're just feeding your body, but it affects your emotions and your mind and your spirit too. Otherwise, why would fasting be considered a spiritual discipline? And same with feasting. You're supposed to feast to celebrate. Or even taking the Lord's Supper in remembrance of him. There's a spiritual aspect to the physical that you are performing. The same with emotions. People talk about sex being emotional. Yeah, it's physical, but it'll affect your emotions. And there's some sort of spiritual component there, because God uses it to make two people one flesh. So there's all these different components and aspects to the human condition. And I feel like philosophers throughout time have frequently made the mistake of isolating them. I'm a big proponent of Stoicism, But there's a specific brand of it that Seneca is actually one of the followers of that I really like, because Seneca doesn't say emotions don't exist like the Epicureans would have. Rather, Seneca says you shouldn't let your emotions overcome you. That they exist and they serve a purpose, but you should not be a slave to them. But there's other people that want to make us a slave to the mind. They don't want to have anything to do with emotion. And it's all thought. And then other people that are just all spirit, they call themselves spiritual, but they have no brain. They don't think things rationally through. I think as Christians, it's important that we use the trifecta, mind, spirit, and body, or your soul, spirit, and body. Soul usually includes your mind and your emotions, to function as one. And it sort of is a reflection of the Trinity, 3 in 1. But this darkness that covered Egypt, you could feel it. All right, so verse 22. So Moses stretched out his hand towards heaven, and there was thick darkness throughout the land of Egypt for 3 days. One person could not see another, and for 3 days they did not move from where they were. I can imagine that. I'd just go to sleep. I mean, no use risking the death of not being able to see where you're going. Yet all the Israelites had light where they lived. So that's pretty amazing. I have no idea what that would look like. Like, was the sun just peeking through in Goshen? Or was it that God's presence was there lighting it up? Verse 24, Pharaoh summoned Moses and said, "Go worship Yahweh. Even your families may go with you. Only your flocks and herds must stay behind." Pharaoh, you're an idiot. You can't negotiate with God like that. Verse 25, Moses responded, "You must also let us have sacrifices and burnt offerings to prepare for Yahweh our God," hence the animals team. "Even our livestock must go with us. Not a hoof will be left behind, because we will take some of them to worship Yahweh our God. We will not know what we will use to worship Yahweh until we get there." But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he was unwilling to let them go. Pharaoh said to him, "Leave me. Make sure you never see my face again. For on the day you see my face, you will die." "As you have said," Moses replied, "I will never see your face again." Whoa! Just be careful of what you ask for. If you tell a prophet that, chances are good you're going to die. So that's the end of chapter 10. Now, what's the darkness? The darkness one's pretty obvious. I didn't even have to look this one up, which I'm very thankful for. But basically, the Egyptian god Ra is considered the sun god. And so the dark, showing that God is actually in charge of the sun and not Ra, the demon god, is a big deal. It's super insulting. I feel like the Egyptian god Ra gets a lot of attention in the present day. And in fact, I think maybe in the Prince of Egypt, Ra was like one of the magicians is like, "By the power of Ra," or whatever. So in any case, there was something I kind of wanted to read you if I can find it. Let's see. Okay, I just want to read this little bit I got from Enduring Word. It says, "The Bible tells us there were several reasons why God sent these plagues upon Pharaoh in Egypt. To answer Pharaoh's question, 'Who is the Lord?' In the plagues, God showed himself greater than any of the false gods of Egypt. To show the power of God through Moses, to give a testimony to the children of Israel for future generations, to judge the false gods, demons really, of Egypt, to warn the nations." More than 400 years later, the Philistines remembered the Lord God of Israel as the one who plagued the Egyptians. So next time we meet, we're going to be going through chapter 11, and we get to that final plague, I guess you could call it a plague, curse upon Egypt that is absolutely devastating, and finally reduces Pharaoh to letting the Israelites go. Until then, this is James with The World's Last Night.